Awaken to life out of the night of unconsciousness. The will finds itself as an individual in an endless and boundless world, among innumerable individuals, all striving, suffering, and erring. And, as if through a troubled dream, it hurries back to the old unconsciousness. We are born into this world, blinking into the light, full of hopes, dreams, and a fundamental assumption that our lives matter, that we are the central characters in our own story, and that the universe, in some way, is orchestrated for us. We chase happiness, strive for success, seek connection, and build futures, all fueled by an inner fire that tells us, "My life is important." But what if that inner fire isn't really ours? What if the driving force behind our deepest desires, our most irrational passions, and our relentless pursuit of existence isn't about you at all? What if nature, in its infinite, indifferent wisdom, sees you not as a cherished creation, but as something far more disposable? What if your deepest desires weren't truly yours? What if every passion, every heartbreak, every sacrifice was never about you, but about something far more indifferent, far more ancient? What if nature doesn't care about your story, only that the story continues? In this video, we confront a truth so unsettling, it might change the way you see love, life, and even your own identity. Today, we dive deep into the challenging, some might say brutal philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer to explore a fundamental, often uncomfortable truth about our place in the natural order. It's a truth that cuts against the grain of optimism, self-help, and even our most romantic notions of love. We're going to confront the raw power of the will to life, understand why the species holds primacy over the individual, and face the stark reality that, in the grand scheme of things, nature doesn't care about you. This isn't an easy topic, and is certainly not a comforting one. But understanding this perspective, even if you ultimately disagree with it, can offer a profound, sobering clarity about the forces that shape our existence and the true meaning behind our most powerful drives. By the end of this video, you'll see love, desire, and even your own sense of self through a completely different lens. It might be unsettling, but, as Schopenhauer knew, the truth, even when grim, has a power of its own. Stick around, because exploring why nature might not care about you is the first step toward understanding what you truly are. The world as will and representation, two sides of the same coin. Schopenhauer argued that the world we experience has two fundamental aspects. On one side, there is the world as representation, Vorstellung. This is the world as it appears to us, structured by our minds through space, time, and causality. It's the world of objects and subjects, of cause and effect, of individual things distinct from one another because they exist in different places at different times. Our science, our everyday perception, our history operate within the realm of representation. It's the world for us, a world filtered and constructed by our cognitive faculties. Think of it like a map. A map represents the territory, but it's not the territory itself. It's a useful tool, structured by coordinates and symbols, allowing us to navigate and understand the spatial relationships between places. But the map isn't the underlying reality. Schopenhauer deeply admired Kant, who also distinguished between the world as it appears, phenomenon, and the world in itself, noumenon. But Schopenhauer took this further. He claimed that the world in itself, the underlying reality behind all appearances, what he called will. This isn't will in the sense of conscious decision-making or personal agency, like deciding to go to the store. Schopenhauer's will is a blind, restless, irrational, purposeless striving. It's the force that manifests as gravity pulling rocks to the earth, as the growth of a plant, as the striving of an animal, and as the fundamental drives within ourselves. It is the innermost essence, the kernel of every individual thing and of the whole world. It lacks cognition, consciousness, or the ability to set goals. It simply strives. In living beings, this fundamental will manifests most clearly as the will to life, will zum Leben. It is this incessant, often painful drive to exist and to propagate existence. So, the world is, on one side, completely representation, the way we cognize and structure it. On the other side, it is completely willed, underlying, striving essence. And importantly, these aren't separate realms, but two aspects of the same reality. The representation is the objectification or appearance of the will. The primacy of the species. Why nature cares about the whole, not the part. Now, here's where things get challenging for our typical, self-centered view of the world. Schopenhauer argues that the true objectification of the will to life is not the individual, but the species. The species, for Schopenhauer, is the Platonic idea of a particular kind of being, unfolding through time and space via the succession of individuals. While the will to life exists and strives within each individual, its real aim its full expression is the preservation and continuation of the species as a whole. Think about it like this. Individual plants sprout, grow, wither, and die. But the idea of the oak tree, the species of oak endures through countless generations of individual trees. The will to life manifests as oak tree, not just this oak tree. Schopenhauer states that the being in itself of every living thing is found first and foremost in its species. This is confirmed by a deep inner recognition that the will objectifies itself precisely through the species. This explains why, for the individual, the interests of the species, especially in matters like sexual relations, procreation, and caring for offspring, are incomparably more important than everything else. This is the driving force behind the phregula, or mating frenzy, in animals, an intense, often irrational drive toward procreation. And in humans, it manifests as the overwhelming force of sexual love. Nature, driven by the blind will to life, seeks to maintain and multiply the species. The individual is merely a vehicle, temporary vessel through which the will expresses itself and ensures the continuity of life. The individual exists, suffers, and dies, but the species persists. This is why nature appears so indifferent to individual suffering and death. If one individual dies, another similar one can take its place. The species continues its march through time. From nature's perspective, the loss of an individual is a small price to pay for the survival of the whole. Sexual love. Nature's masterpiece of illusion. Nowhere is nature's strategy of prioritizing the species over the individual and its cunning use of illusion more apparent than in the realm of sexual love. Schopenhauer dedicates a significant portion of his work to this topic, calling his essay on it a pearl. He argues that what we experience as passionate love isn't primarily about companionship or individual happiness. While those aspects may appear on the surface, the deeper driving force is the will of the species, using our intellect and desires for its own goal, the creation of the next generation. Sexual desire in general is the will to life itself, undirected and raw. But when that desire focuses intensely on one specific person, what we call falling in love, it is the will to life, attempting to objectify itself in a particular new individual, one that can only be created by the union of this man and this woman. Nature needs the individual to act often, to make great sacrifices for the sake of the species. But the human intellect is primarily geared toward egoistic, individual interests. So how does nature override this self-interest? Through illusion, through instinct. That intense feeling of attraction, the belief that this one person will bring us eternal happiness, that is nature's trick. It's an illusion, Maya, a chimera that motivates us to pursue the beloved relentlessly, overcoming any obstacle and sometimes risking everything, all in service of generating the unique individual that the will of the species demands. Schopenhauer analyzes the seemingly objective elements of attraction and shows their species-serving logic. The focus on youth, health, and strong physical features aims at ensuring the vigor and perfection of the species type. The attraction to partners who compensate for our own deficiencies, short people preferring tall ones, blondes preferring brunettes, is about correcting imbalances and restoring the ideal species type in the offspring. Even the mysterious soul connection we feel with some individuals is, according to Schopenhauer, the subconscious recognition of a compatibility of will, character, and intellect necessary to produce the exact individual desired by the will to life. This, he says, explains why romantic passion often fades after procreation is achieved or becomes impossible. The illusion has served its evolutionary purpose, and nature withdraws its enchantment, leaving the couple to face the ordinary, often incompatible, reality of living together. Marriage for love, driven by this biological illusion, is therefore frequently unhappy, as it fulfills the species' goal, but not the long-term compatibility of the individuals involved. Stories and examples. Nature's uncaring hand. Schopenhauer wasn't just theorizing in the abstract. He used vivid examples from nature, literature, and human experience to illustrate this often unseen force. The will of the species, acting through individuals, often against their conscious interests or well-being. Let's look at some of these stories, drawn from sources he referenced, to bring this unsettling concept to life. Example 1. The ichneumon wasp and the insect larva. Consider the ichneumon wasp. This tiny insect hunts for a specific kind of larva. It doesn't kill or eat the larva immediately. Instead, it lays its eggs inside the still-living larva. When the wasp larvae hatch, they feed on the host from the inside, eventually killing it. Why does the wasp do this? Not out of cruelty or rational planning. Schopenhauer would say it's driven by instinct, the will of the species. The wasp is compelled by an unconscious drive to find exactly the right conditions for the next generation's survival. Its individual welfare is irrelevant. Everything is sacrificed for the propagation of the species. Example 2. The drone bee's sacrifice. Another powerful illustration comes from the world of bees. The drone bee has one singular biological purpose: to fertilize the queen. Out of hundreds of drones in a hive, only one typically succeeds. After mating, that drone dies. The rest, having failed, are expelled from the hive and left to die of exposure or starvation. To Schopenhauer, this reflects the will of the species operating with what he calls opulent generosity. Nature produces a surplus of potential fathers, but once their purpose is either fulfilled or deemed unnecessary, their lives are discarded. The individual drone doesn't choose this. It's instinctively driven toward a destiny that serves the species, not itself. Example 3. The salmon's fatal journey. Consider the salmon, which swims upstream for hundreds or even thousands of miles, fighting currents, leaping waterfalls, evading predators, all to reach a specific spawning ground. After spawning, it dies. This journey is not undertaken for personal gain. The salmon receives no benefit, only exhaustion, injury, and death. It is driven by a biological compulsion, an instinct to preserve the species. Its individual life is consumed entirely by a purpose that serves only the collective. Example 4. The moth and the flame. The age-old metaphor of the moth to the flame captures Schopenhauer's insight perfectly. The moth is instinctively drawn to light, a trait that once served its species well. But in the presence of artificial human lights, this same instinct leads it to a fiery death. For Schopenhauer, this is a case where a once useful instinct, blindly followed, becomes fatal in a new environment. Nature does not adapt quickly for the sake of the individual. The moth perishes not because of its weakness, but because nature's indifferent machinery continues to ruin even if it runs off a cliff. Example 5. Human sacrifices in love and war. Schopenhauer extends this logic to human passion. He observes that sexual desire can become so intense that people sacrifice wealth, honor, health, even their lives for a specific beloved. This is irrational from an egoistic standpoint. Why would someone risk everything for a relationship that may not even bring lasting satisfaction? His answer: it's not really the individual who's acting. It's the will of the species, working through the individual to bring about a specific combination of traits in the next generation. The emotional intensity of romantic love is not personal, it's evolutionary manipulation. Even dying for one's country, Schopenhauer suggests, can be seen in this light. The soldier sacrifices their life not for personal gain, but for the collective survival of their people, the species type. In a broader sense, it is the immortal part of the individual, his connection to the species, that drives this ultimate act of submission. Example 6. Pederasty as a species strategy. In a deeply controversial passage, Schopenhauer even attempts to explain the phenomenon of pederasty through the lens of nature's strategy. While he personally viewed it as unnatural, he speculates that nature sometimes diverts the sexual instinct of individuals who are too young, too old, or otherwise unsuitable for producing healthy offspring. Since nature cannot rely on morality or reason to prevent reproduction in such cases, it might redirect the sexual drive toward non-procreative behavior. According to Schopenhauer, this could be seen as a lesser evil, a way to prevent the degradation of the species type. It is a brutal but telling example of how little nature cares about individual sentiment or moral judgment, as long as its core goal, species preservation, is fulfilled. The suffering of individual existence. These examples highlight a crucial point in Schopenhauer's philosophy. To exist as an individual driven by the will to life is to suffer. The will, being a blind, purposeless striving, can never find ultimate satisfaction. Desires are endless. Once one is fulfilled, another arises. Even achieving a desired end only temporarily removes a painful lack. If desires cease, boredom sets in another form of suffering. Life, from this perspective, is not a gift to be enjoyed, but a tasca drudgery pensum, corvée, to be worked through. We are like debtors, constantly struggling to pay the debt of existence that was incurred not by us, but by the preceding generation through the act of procreation. Birth is a penalty, poena. Life is labor, and death is necessity, necess mori. The fact that we must constantly struggle against difficulties that our physical existence is a constantly checked dying. Uncostante morir impedito. A continual postponement of death further underscores the inherent suffering of individual life. Even our mental activity is a continuously delayed boredom. Una noia continuamente allontanata. The suffering of life is a direct consequence of being a manifestation of the will to life as an individual. The intensity of suffering in individual experiences is, in a sense, a measure of the strength of the will within them. The individual is constantly pushed and pulled by desires and needs that can never be fully satisfied because they stem from a boundless, irrational force. Schopenhauer suggests that our very consciousness, our intellect, which we often see as our greatest ascetes, in fact, a tool developed by the will to better navigate the world and serve its ends, namely, individual survival and species propagation. Rationality gives us an advantage, but it does not free us from the fundamental suffering inherent in being driven by the will. The stark reality is that nature, embodied by the will to life and its drive for the species, is indifferent to the individual's pain, despair, or unfulfilled longings. The drama of individual happiness or tragedy is secondary to the ongoing, impersonal pantomime of the species' continuation. So, where does this leave us? If nature doesn't care about our individual well-being, if our deepest drives are merely tools for the species, if existence is inherently painful, is there any hope? Schopenhauer's philosophy is often called pessimistic, for good reason. He didn't offer easy answers or comforting illusions. However, recognizing the nature of the will to life and its indifference to the individualis, for him, the first step toward a profound understanding of our place in reality. Conclusion and lessons learned. What can we learn from Schopenhauer's challenging perspective on the life of the species and nature's indifference to us as individuals? 1. Understand the source of our drives. By seeing our fundamental desire especially those surrounding love and reproduction as manifestations of the will of the species, we can gain a measure of detachment. The intense feelings, the irrational pursuits, these are not just about me and my happiness, but about a much larger, impersonal force using us. This understanding, Schopenhauer suggested, can help us gain clarity and perhaps control over these powerful drives. 2. Reframe the pursuit of happiness. If, as Schopenhauer argues, happiness and pleasure are not positive states, but merely the absence of pain or want, then the goal of life shifts. Instead of chasing fleeting pleasures, true wisdom may lie in minimizing suffering. As the ancient Greeks said, the wise man does not pursue pleasure, but freedom from pain. This doesn't eliminate suffering, but it changes how we navigate it. 3. Acknowledge nature's indifference. Accepting that nature doesn't prioritize our individual interests can be sobering, but also liberating. It removes the illusion that the universe owes us anything, or that there's a divine plan centered around our well-being. We are part of a vast, impersonal process, and our joys or sorrows are often incidental to its functioning. 4. Find value beyond the individual. While the individual is transient and suffers, our connection to the species to something larger than ourselves is what Schopenhauer calls our immortal part. This might shift our focus from personal ambition to contributing something enduring. Knowledge, art, or a deeper understanding of existence itself. 5. The possibility of world refusal. For Schopenhauer, the deepest philosophical insight is the recognition of the inherent suffering and meaninglessness in the will's endless striving. This can lead to what he calls the negation of the will to life. This is not suicide, which he saw as a form of submission to suffering. Rather, it's a conscious turning away from the will's demands, achieved through deep metaphysical insight. This leads to resignation, asceticism, and ultimately, a state of willlessness. Though bleak from an everyday perspective, Schopenhauer presents this state as the only true liberation from the pain that comes with willing. Schopenhauer's philosophy isn't a feel-good philosophy. It's a sharp, unflinching look at existence, revealing a world that is blind, driven, and fundamentally indifferent to individual fate. But by seeing ourselves as manifestations of this larger will, we gain insight into the nature of suffering, and perhaps, through that understanding, a different kind of freedom. He challenges us to ask, are we truly living our own lives, or are we merely being lived by the will of the species? And in that radical questioning, maybe, just maybe, we begin to walk toward a more enduring kind of wisdom. Thanks for walking this difficult road with me. If something in this video made you pause, question, or see the world more clearly, share your thoughts below. And if you found wisdom here, I invite you to like the video, subscribe for more explorations, and continue walking with us toward the truth no matter how hard it is to face. Until next time, think deeply, live honestly, and never stop seeking what lies beneath the surface.